All right, ready to dive into one of history's biggest mysteries, the JFK assassination. And today we're going to be looking at this book by... It's this photographic record of, well, that tragic day in Dallas.
It really is more than just a photo album, though, isn't it? I mean, you look at this thing and you start to question the whole official story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it gets you thinking, like right off the bat, with that Zapruder film. I mean, everyone has seen it capture the whole assassination. But Grodin, he makes some pretty surprising claims about it.
It's wild, right? He's basically saying that some of those frames, they might have been messed with. Like, there's this hidden story within the film itself, something beyond what we've been told.
Whoa, okay. So that's a big claim. What kind of evidence does he have for that? I mean, does he actually show what's different about these, like, altered frames?
Well, he says he's got access to this, like, unedited version, and he compares, like, keyframes really meticulously. And he's pointing out these little discrepancies, like in Kennedy's reactions, the impact of the fatal headshot, even just the movements of people in the background.
Man, that's creepy. If that's true, why would anyone tamper with something like that? What's the point?
That's where it gets kind of murky. He hints at a possible cover-up, like maybe certain people, they had a reason to shape how the public sees the assassination.
So right away we're seeing this, like departure from the official story.
hmm
What else did Grodin find that kind of challenges those Warren Commission conclusions?
One thing that really jumps out is like the eyewitness accounts. They're all over the place. It's like people saw completely different events, even though they were all there.
I mean, how is that even possible? You'd think with something so important, everyone would remember the same thing.
Right. But Grodin, he brings up specific examples, like Jean Hill. She's the one who chased after the supposed assassin. And then there's Howard Brennan. His description of the shooter didn't even really match Oswald.
And then there's that whole thing about witnesses, dying or disappearing. That's got to raise some eyebrows.
Totally. Some felt pressured to change their stories. Others just vanished. Like, what were they so afraid of? What were they trying to hide?
Yeah, that's the big question. It's like we're just starting to see this web of intrigue.
Right. And we're just scratching the surface here. Wait till we get into the medical evidence. That's where things get even crazier.
Okay, let's talk about that. What are some of the medical mysteries Grodin digs into?
He really goes deep on the discrepancies around Kennedy's wounds, especially the throat wound and the back wounds. These details, people kind of gloss over them, but Grodin's making them central to his whole analysis.
Yeah, like the single bullet theory. Always seemed too convenient to explain everything.
Totally. Grodin, he doesn't shy away from bringing in expert opinions that totally challenge that whole single bullet idea. He talks about trajectories not lining up, wounds being too severe.
So are we saying there might have been multiple shooters?
That's a possibility he's definitely leaning towards. And then you've got the missing brain and skull fragments. Crucial evidence just gone from the National Archives. Oof.
Missing evidence. It's like something out of a movie. This is getting wild.
It is, isn't it? And then there's Oswald himself, the alleged assassin. His whole story, it's just full of twists and turns.
All right, let's talk about Oswald. Lone gunman or patsy? What's Grodin's take on his role?
He walks us through Oswald's movements before, during, and after the shooting. And he points out this weird calmness Oswald had. Doesn't really fit someone who just did something so horrific.
So we're saying he might have been framed.
Grodin really dives deep into the evidence. He examines the reports linking Oswald to the murder weapon, and he even points out inconsistencies in those nitrate tests, the ones supposed to prove he fired the gun.
Wow. So who would want to frame Oswald? Who benefits from all this?
That's where it gets really interesting. Grodin starts connecting all these dots, laying out potential suspects, motives, everything. Mobsters, anti-Castro activists, you name it.
Wait, are we talking about a conspiracy? Like a big one? Maybe even government involvement?
That's a theory that's been around forever, and Grodin, he presents some pretty compelling evidence for it. He even talks about this guy, Joseph Miltier, a right-wing extremist who, weeks before the assassination, predicted the whole thing. The method, the location, everything. It's spooky.
That's chilling. But why would the government want Kennedy dead? What's the motive?
Grodin looks at several possibilities. He talks about Lyndon Johnson's rise to power, theories about intelligence agencies wanting to silence Kennedy, stuff like that.
Man, this is a lot to process. Every little detail just leads to more questions.
I know. It's like one giant rabbit hole. Grodin's not giving us easy answers, but he makes you question everything. Like, maybe the official story isn't the whole story?
It's clear we're just scratching the surface here. But before we go any further, let's focus on one place that really pops up in Grodin's investigation. New Orleans.
Ah, yes, New Orleans, a city full of mystery. It becomes like, a central point in this whole JFK puzzle.
It's like Oswald's time there is a crucial chapter. Maybe it holds the key to understanding everything.
Exactly. In New Orleans, Oswald was hanging around these guys, David Ferry and Guy Bannister, super shady figures, deeply involved in all those anti-Castro operations.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about these New Orleans characters. Who were they and how do they fit into all of this?
Well, David Ferry, he was a real piece of work. Pilot, ex-priest, and he was mixed up in all sorts of stuff. Possible CIA ties, maybe even the mob. Who knows?
Well, I was a Bannister guy.
Bannister, he was ex-FBI, then turned private investigator, super anti-communist. And get this, his office was in the same building where Oswald set up his pro-Castro group, the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
Hold on. The alleged assassin was running a pro-Castro group. That doesn't add up.
It's weird, right? But Grodin, he digs into it, exploring the idea that maybe Oswald's pro-Castro stuff was just a cover, like he was playing both sides.
So like a double agent.
Exactly. Grodin presents evidence showing Oswald and Ferry met multiple times in the months before the assassination.
This is getting more and more complicated by the minute. We've got conflicting witness statements, possible evidence tampering, missing evidence, and now links to these shady characters in New Orleans. Where do we even begin to make sense of this?
It's a tangled mess, that's for sure. Grodin's not giving us a simple answer, but it's a fascinating journey through this historical mystery.
It's definitely clear that Oswald's time in New Orleans and his connections to Ferry and Bannister are super important to understanding what happened in Dallas. But there's another guy we got to talk about, someone who enters the picture in New Orleans, District Attorney Jim Garrison.
Oh yeah, Jim Garrison. He was the one who really put New Orleans on the map in terms of the JFK assassination, and he added fuel to that whole conspiracy fire.
Garrison, he was controversial. Some called him a publicity hound, others said he was a truth seeker. What does Grodin say about him?
Grodin seems to think Garrison genuinely believed there was more to the JFK story than we knew. He saw a huge conspiracy, one that went way beyond Oswald, and he was determined to expose it no matter what.
So what was Garrison's theory? Who did he think was behind it all?
His investigation eventually led him to Clay Shaw, a big-time businessman from New Orleans with CIA connections. Garrison thought Shaw was part of the group that orchestrated the assassination, maybe even with Ferry and Oswald.
Clay Shaw. How was he connected to the assassination?
Garrison believes Shaw used his power and connections to get weapons and arrange logistics for the whole plot. He also suspected Shaw was involved with anti-Castro groups, linking the assassination back to Kennedy's policies on Cuba.
So are we back to the idea that Kennedy's foreign policy got him killed?
That's what Garrison was thinking. His investigation definitely gave more weight to the idea that this wasn't just a lone nut, but a planned operation with huge consequences.
But if Garrison had such strong evidence, why wasn't Clay Shaw convicted? What went down at the trial?
Things get messy here. Grodin talks about all these obstacles Garrison faced. He claims the CIA was interfering with the investigation, infiltrating his team, leaking info to Shaw's defense, even sending investigators on wild goose chases.
Whoa, seriously, the CIA trying to sabotage the investigation, that's a huge claim.
And Grodin backs it up with evidence. He suggests that some people in the government really didn't want the truth to come out.
That's mind-blowing. So if Garrison's investigation was compromised, does that mean Shaw was innocent?
That's still up for debate. The jury found Shaw not guilty, but a lot of people believe the trial was rigged to protect the real masterminds.
Man, this is incredible. The more we learn, the more confusing it gets.
Yeah.
It feels like the line between truth and fiction is totally blurred.
That's the JFK assassination for you. It makes you question everything.
We've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dives. The Zapruder film, the witnesses, the medical controversies, Oswald, and then this whole New Orleans scene with Ferry, Bannister, and Shaw, and of course Jim Garrison's investigation, trying to untangle this whole web.
Yeah, it's clear the JFK assassination is like a giant puzzle with a bunch of missing pieces, a story with so many layers, and a mystery that just won't go away.
This deep dive has already been crazy, and I can't wait to keep going in the next part.
Welcome back. You know, it's really amazing how Grodin uses all these photographs to, challenge the official story. It's like he's saying, look, don't just take my word for it, see for yourself.
Yeah, it's true. He lays it all out, the photos, and it's like we become detectives ourselves. We're looking at these tiny details that maybe everyone else missed.
Exactly. Like he goes into the bullet trajectories, he uses photos and diagrams to show how the wounds Kennedy had, they don't really line up with the idea that all the shots came from that book depository building.
So is he saying there was another shooter? Maybe somewhere else in Dealey Plaza.
He explores that possibility, yeah. He focuses on things like that bullet hole in the windshield of the limo. And then there are all these people who said they saw a flash or smoke coming from the grassy knoll.
Oh, man, the grassy knoll.
Yeah.
That's like conspiracy theory central. Does Groden actually have anything solid to back that up?
He makes a pretty convincing case that something fishy was going on over there, something the Warren Commission just ignored.
Okay, so if there was another shooter, who could it be? Does Groden name any names?
He throws out a bunch of possibilities. Mobsters, anti-Castro Cubans, even disgruntled CIA guys. He even brings up Lyndon Johnson.
Whoa, hold on. Lyndon Johnson. That's a big accusation.
Yeah.
What's his evidence for that?
Well, he looks at Johnson's, political ambitions, like maybe he had a reason to want Kennedy gone. And then there's that whole thing about Johnson being sworn in so quickly on Air Force One, like right after the assassination.
What's strange about that?
Groden points out how eager Johnson was to take the oath, even while the country was still in shock. And then there's this thing about the judge, Sarah Hughes. She wasn't even wearing her robes. For such a big moment, that's kind of weird, right?
Yeah, that's a little odd. It's like that whole ceremony just adds more questions.
That's exactly what Groden wants us to do. Question everything. Don't take anything for granted. Consider every possibility, no matter how crazy it sounds.
It's like he's giving us all a magnifying glass and saying, go find the truth. It's hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. And that's what makes Groden's book so cool. It's not about just believing everything he says, but thinking critically, analyzing the evidence.
But with so much information out there, so many different theories, how do we know what to believe? It's like a maze.
Right. It's tough. We got to be careful, readers, Weigh the evidence. Ask yourselves, who benefits from this story? Who's trying to hide something?
This is more than just history, isn't it? It's about power, secrets, and how information can be twisted.
Totally. Groden's book is a reminder that we can't just be passive about history. We got to be involved, challenge things, demand answers.
Speaking of answers, were there any other investigations after the Warren Commission? Did anyone else try to figure out what happened?
Yeah, Groden talks about the House Select Committee on Assassinations. They wrapped up in '79 and said Kennedy was probably killed by a conspiracy.
Really? The government actually admitted there might have been a conspiracy? Did they say who did it?
No, they never figured out who was behind it. But they did find some new evidence that totally contradicted the Warren Commission.
Like what?
Well, they looked at that dictabelt recording from that day. It's an audio recording, and the Warren Commission ignored it, but it seems to show there were more than 3 shots fired.
So maybe Oswald wasn't the only shooter after all.
That's what the recording suggests.
Yeah.
They also looked deeper into Oswald's ties to Cuba and the Soviet Union, and they even explored possible mob connections.
It sounds like Oswald was living a double life.
That's for sure. This House Select Committee, they really opened a can of worms. They didn't find all the answers, but they showed that the official story was incomplete.
So where does that leave us now? Are we any closer to the truth?
Well, the truth is always complicated, right? Groden's work and all these other researchers, they've shown us that there are holes in the official story, maybe even a cover-up, and all these connections that just don't fit the lone gunman idea.
It's crazy to think that after all this time, we're still finding new information, new theories. The JFK assassination, it's like a puzzle that never ends.
Yeah, and it shows how powerful this event was. It wasn't just about a president being killed. It was like a shockwave that changed everything. And it still affects how we see history and power today.
It's like this open wound that never heals. It reminds us that democracy is fragile, and the search for truth, it's never really over.
That's a great way to put it. And like any wound, it leaves a scar, a story. And we're still trying to understand that story. We got to keep asking questions, looking for answers, and never forget how important it is to find the truth, even if it's hidden.
This deep dive has been amazing. I can't wait to see what we uncover next. But before we move on, let's take a minute to think about everything we've learned so far and what it all means in the grand scheme of things. All right, we're back, diving deep into the JFK assassination. We've covered a lot of ground, from the Zapruder film all the way to those shadowy figures down in New Orleans.
Yeah. And through it all, Groden's book, The Killing of a President, has been right there with us. Like he's pushing us to look beyond the surface, question the official story.
It's been a wild ride, that's for sure. Sometimes even a little unsettling. So as we wrap this up, what are some of the biggest takeaways for you? What really stands out?
I think what gets me the most is just how much evidence there is that goes against what the Warren Commission said. Groden, he lays out a really strong case for a much bigger, more complicated story than just a lone gunman.
You're right. It's not just one thing here. It's all these inconsistencies piling up, unanswered questions, things that look like cover-ups. It makes you doubt the official story.
Exactly. And Grodin, he doesn't say for sure who did it, but he connects all these dots. You sort of think, man, maybe I don't know anything about what really happened that day.
Like that whole New Orleans connection, it's so strange, right? Oswald, David Ferry, Guy Bannister, Clay Shaw. It's like this web of secrets and hidden agendas.
It's like a spy movie. Nothing is what it seems. Everyone's got a secret. Grodin, he captures that whole Cold War feeling perfectly. It's like we're right there with him, uncovering this massive conspiracy.
And then all that evidence that just disappeared. Missing brain fragments, altered photos, those dictabelt recordings destroyed. It feels like someone wanted to hide the truth.
Doesn't it? Makes you wonder, what are they so afraid of? If Oswald really did act alone, why go through all that trouble to change the evidence?
Yeah, that's the big mystery, isn't it? The more we dig, the less we seem to know. But even if we never get all the answers, Grodin's book is a good reminder to think critically, to question authority.
Absolutely. We can't just believe everything we're told, especially when it comes to something this important. We have to be skeptical, ask questions, demand to know the truth.
This whole deep dive, it's shown us that history isn't set in stone. It's something we're always looking at in new ways, reinterpreting. And it's a conversation we all need to be part of.
Well said. And as we keep exploring the JFK assassination, we got to remember that the truth, it's a journey. We might never reach the final destination, but it's still a journey worth taking.
You've definitely given us a lot to think about. Grodin's The Killing of a President, it's a powerful book. It makes you face some uncomfortable truths and really grapple with the complexity of history.
It's a book that sticks with you, you finish reading it, and you're still thinking about it, questioning everything you thought you knew. And you just want to keep digging, keep searching for answers.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the JFK assassination. We encourage everyone to check out Grodin's book, look at the evidence, and come to your own conclusions. Maybe the truth is out there, just waiting to be found. Until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, and keep diving deep.